As I mentioned before, thank you again for joining us. My name is Diana. I'm the Product Engagement Manager at Bloomerang. You might recognize me if you've been attending our Academy classes or been watching the recordings or listening to some of our release and help videos. Today, we are talking about Bloomerang plus Zapier using scheduled reports to automate task management. I'm very excited about this topic because I'm all about automation and making things easier for myself and for others, for all of you. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Jessie Gilchrist. Jessie is a Zapier certified consultant from our friends at Sidekick Solutions. Sidekick Solutions is a Bloomerang partner specializing in system automations for Bloomerang. Sidekick Solutions has been a Bloomerang user since 2013 and most recently was part of the Bloomerang team that launched the Bloomerang Zapier app. So we're so excited to have Jessie here with us today to share her expertise and explore how you can use Bloomerang scheduled reports with Zapier to sync tasks from Bloomerang to a task management tool or a calendar. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jessie.
Thanks, Diana. So I am located about 2.5 hours west of Seattle, Washington. So northwest part of the United States where the heat dome is going on right now. Luckily, it's easing off. So for those of you that are saying you're in the 90s and the hundreds, I feel you. It's pretty unusual for us. So I feel like I get a sense of what the Midwest states and Southern states go through. So today's webinar, the goal is really to show you how Bloomerang's new scheduled report tool can be used to parse and sync data and tasks from Bloomerang to a task management tool or a calendar using Zapier. So this type of a sync can really support your fundraising efforts by reducing the amount of time that you're spending doing data entry and ensuring that any tasks that are entered in Bloomerang appear in your day-to-day task management solution. So today we're going to start off by kind of introducing Bloomerang and Zapier, how they work together, and why Zapier integrations are a key feature of not only your Bloomerang system, but your fundraising strategy as well. We're going to discuss how a parsing tool like Mail Parser can be used with Bloomerang scheduled reports to support more advanced automation use cases. And then we actually will do a demo. So we're going to demonstrate how you can sync tasks created in Bloomerang to create a task in a task management solution like Asana. And then we'll wrap up by exploring some advanced use cases and alternatives. And we are going to cover a lot today. So please, keep in mind that Diana will absolutely share the recording of this. So try to follow along when you can. If there's something that feels a little complex, know that you will get the recording, you can watch it back, and hopefully be able to implement some of these solutions for yourself. So as Diana mentioned, feel free to submit any questions during the presentation. The Q&A is a great way to kind of queue those questions up for when we have our scheduled question breaks. So the first thing I want to do is I want to see how many of you are using Zapier. And if you are using Zapier, are you using it with Bloomerang? So thanks, Diana, for launching that poll. We'll give a couple seconds here to let you all respond.
Thank you everyone for your responses. Jessie, it looks like 47% have heard of Zapier before but haven't used it. 31% of our respondents, this is their first time hearing of Zapier, and 11% both tied have used Zapier and have Zaps running with Bloomerang, or have used Zapier but not with Bloomerang.
Awesome. So it sounds like we have a few people that are still kind of new to Zapier. So we're going to go ahead and start with a quick overview of what Zapier is and how it kind of extends the power of your Bloomerang database. So for those of you that are familiar with Zapier or already have Zaps running, this is going to be a refresher for you. Please hang on, we will get to more content here soon, but for those that are new, we want to make sure we cover this. So you might be wondering why we're talking about Zapier when this webinar is about Bloomerang scheduled reports and task management. And it's a fair question. So Zapier is the software that enables additional Bloomerang integration and fundraising opportunities. It's a middleware that sits between your Bloomerang database and other apps, like in terms of task management, we'd be talking about Asana, Trello, Google Calendar, Outlook, and it really just helps the apps talk to each other. So at its core, Zapier is automation software. With the Zapier platform, you can build one integration or many with Bloomerang, automating hundreds of tasks around your database within a single platform. So we get excited about Zapier for 3 reasons. First and foremost, Zapier connects to over 3,000 other applications. So any application in Zapier's directory can be connected to Bloomerang. If it's on Zapier's list, so this is zapier.com/apps, this is their marketplace where you can search through the over 3,000 applications that are connected to Zapier. If an app is on Zapier, it's really highly likely that it can be connected with Bloomerang. So you can see how many different apps there are. You also can look by category. So if you're looking at productivity, if you're trying to find a task management solution, you can always search the task management category and see what task management apps could be linked up with Bloomerang. So there's a lot of different ones in the marketplace. So the second reason why we get excited about Zapier is that it really was designed for anyone to build integrations. You don't need to know how to code to build a Zap. Anyone can build and maintain integrations, and we're going to walk through a couple of demos today so you can get a feel for what this process looks like. And then the last reason why we love Zapier is that it really enables customization. You aren't limited to a one-size-fits-all workflow, mapping, formatting. You can build an integration that really meets your organization's use case. And the flexibility of this platform is especially important because every organization's fundraising strategy and needs are different. So before we dive into the specifics for using Bloomerang scheduled reports to trigger automations with Zapier, let's first do a quick overview of Bloomerang scheduled report functionality and how Parsing Tools work. So first, I want to see how many of you are using scheduled reports in Bloomerang right now. Thanks for launching that poll here, Diana.
Thank you, everyone. It looks like 51% use scheduled reports in Bloomerang, 44% have heard of scheduled reports but not used them, and only 5% have never heard of the scheduled reports feature in Bloomerang.
Fantastic. This is great. So I love scheduled reports. I think they are fantastic and a fantastic addition to the functionality you get in Bloomerang. So if you've attended any of our Bloomerang and Zapier webinars in this series, you're likely familiar with the Bloomerang Zapier app. And the Zapier app is a great way to connect your Bloomerang database and build automations. However, the Zapier app isn't the only way to trigger automations. Using scheduled reports in Bloomerang and a parsing tool, you can open up additional opportunities for automation, saving your organization time and energy. So what do I mean by that? So with Bloomerang's functionality for delivering scheduled reports, you can deliver a report to one or many email addresses on a recurring basis. So based on your automation use case, you can set your scheduled report to kick off a workflow in Zapier on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And the ability to send scheduled reports from Bloomerang to a non-Bloomerang user allows you to use these scheduled reports to trigger Zapier automations. So with this expanded functionality, you can trigger automations in Bloomerang based on non-transaction records, such as interactions, notes, tasks. You could trigger an automation in Zapier based off of a soft credit, attribute, updated or refunded transactions. And additionally, scheduled reports allow you to pull in Bloomerang transaction data that is not available in the Zapier app. So for example, if you wanted to pull the next installment date and amount for a recurring donation or a pledge into your workflow, a scheduled report would allow you to pull that information in, whereas the Zapier app doesn't provide that information in its functionality. So you can see how the amount of data that we could pull or use in a workflow can really be expanded by using Bloomerang scheduled reports. Now, you've probably heard me mention a couple of times about a tool called a Parser. So when we trigger an automation from a Bloomerang scheduled report, the report needs to pass through an intermediary tool called a Parser before it can trigger in Zapier. A parsing tool's primary job is to extract the information contained in an email or an attachment in a way that can be used for further steps in an automation. So for example, if we were to forward an email to a parsing tool, we could set up rules to extract the email sender's name, their email address, the date the email was sent, and the body of the email, and use that information for an automation. Now, for the purposes of this workflow, we're going to use a parsing tool to extract each row in a scheduled report as a separate record, and that record will trigger an automation in Zapier. So without this parsing tool, there's no way for Zapier to pull apart separate records from that scheduled report or appropriately identify the different fields, meaning the columns, in the report for each record. Now, it's important to note before we move forward that parsing tools are not included in your Bloomerang or your Zapier subscription. A parser is a separate integration tool with its own subscription. So throughout the remainder of this webinar, we're going to be demonstrating some use cases using MailParser. MailParser is a popular parsing tool, and we've found it to be user-friendly, reliable, and competitive when it comes to pricing. But it's important to know that it is separate from Bloomerang and Zapier. Now, the other thing I want to mention before we move forward is that the workflow we're going to show today is likely going to feel advanced. We try to make these webinars really user-friendly and something that you could follow along and set it up on your own. This webinar, it may be something where you need to watch the recording a couple of times or watch it as you set it up yourself in order to get this workflow set up. So I do want to recognize right here at the start that some of the concepts that we're talking about here today may feel a little overwhelming, and would like to reassure you that you will get the recording so you can watch it again. But also, if you have questions, you can always reach out to us at Sidekick Solutions if you'd like additional support setting up automations. So before we move on to actually diving into our demo, I want to see if there's any quick questions about scheduled reports or how parsing tools work.
Thanks, Jessie. So far, no questions about scheduled reports or parsing.
Perfect. We will move along. We've got a lot to cover today. So the use case that we are going to start with today is how you can use a scheduled report of new tasks in Bloomerang to trigger a Zapier workflow. So this is an important demonstration as there's likely a use case at nearly every organization for automating tasks following the creation of a task in Bloomerang. Now, this use case is really designed for if you use a task management tool outside of Bloomerang. So the goal of this task is to say, if we create a new task in Bloomerang, we want to create a corresponding task in our task management tool. So that could be a task management solution like Asana or Trello, or it could even be a calendar like Outlook or Google Calendar. I do intend to, toward the end of this webinar, have a second use case for creating tasks in Bloomerang that is not tied to the use of a specific task management solution. So if you don't use a task management solution, we do have another use case that we're going to demo here as well. So before we dive into the demo, I want to get a sense for what tools you're using for task management. So please let us know if you use Bloomerang exclusively, if you use Asana, Trello, Jira, maybe use Google Tasks or Google Calendar. And you can select multiple of these. So select the ones that apply to you and let us know which type of task management solution you use.
Thanks, Jessie. And for everyone, if you are not currently using a task management tool as well, you can let us know in the chat, or if you're using an option that is not listed here, let us know in the chat as well. So far, it looks like 63% of our respondents today are using Bloomerang, 42% are using Outlook, 26% are using Google Calendar, 43% are still using pen and paper, and a smattering of the other tools, as well as Monday.com and Franklin Planner.
Perfect. Okay, so the workflow we're going to dive into here and demonstrate is going to be based around a task management tool called Asana. However, the step that we're going to do in Asana, you could actually create this in whatever task management solution you're using. So if it's Outlook, if it's Google Calendar, instead of creating a task in Asana, you could go ahead and create, a task or an event on your calendar for when that task is scheduled. So in this workflow, we are going to use a daily scheduled report of tasks created in Bloomerang the prior day. And we're going to create a corresponding task in Asana. So Asana is a pretty well-known task management app. Looks like in the chat, Judy is familiar with Asana. We use it personally at Sidekick Solutions as well. And so it's a really user-friendly task management solution that we're going to demo here today. So this is a great use case to make sure fundraising tasks created in Bloomerang make their way to your task management tool, ensuring you don't miss a deadline. So we're also going to show you in this workflow how to make it dynamic, to essentially assign the task in Asana based on the team member or the user in Bloomerang that the task is assigned to. So this is the piece where we're going to dive into live demo. Again, some pieces of this may feel a little bit advanced. And so give yourself a little bit of grace, know that if you do want to set this up, you may need to watch the recording one, maybe two times afterwards, or follow along with it and be able to pause with the recording when you go to actually set this up yourself. So the first thing we need to do if we are going to set up this standard task sync from Bloomerang to Asana is that we actually need to set up our parsing inbox. So I'm going to go to Mail Parser. And this is our Mail Parser sandbox or Sidekick Solutions. And I would just click Create a New Inbox. And I'm going to call this Daily Task Created Yesterday. And I'm going to save it. So when I click Save, Mail Parser is going to provide a unique email address that's tied to that inbox. So it's tied to that specific inbox that's used. And we will set up parsing rules in a minute for how we'd want to treat any emails that are directed to this address. So once we set up our inbox, now we need to go to Bloomerang and set up our scheduled report. So I'm going to go to my reports list and I'm going to create a new report of tasks. Now there's two filters we're going to apply to our tasks. The first is that we're going to set the created date to yesterday. Now you could also set this to today and have the report scheduled to send to the parsing tool at the end of the day, but we're going to go ahead and use yesterday. And then the other thing we're going to do is that we are going to filter so that the status is active. So we don't want to include tasks that were entered and completed on the same day. We only want those that are still active tasks. So if I refresh this, you can see I have one task that I created yesterday. That's right here. Now, the other piece that we need to do is that we need to modify the columns in our report to ensure all the data I need when creating my task in Asana is included. By default, all the standard fields on the task are included here when we set up a new task report. The only field we might additionally want to add for the task is the note. So we'll add the note in there. Now we could also pull in additional contact information like the constituents, primary email. So maybe we want to pull in the primary street and city, state and postal code. So you can see we pulled in the address information. Maybe we also want to pull in their primary email. And the reason why we'd want to pull this contact information is so that when we create the task in Asana, we have all of the contact information right there for the constituent so that we can take action on whatever this task is without needing to then log back into Bloomerang and capture that information. So we're going to pull the phone number in, primary phone number. Okay. So you can see that I have all of my primary contact information for this constituent and then all of the details for that task that was created in Asana. Now, once you set up your scheduled report, and once we set it up to schedule and send to our parsing tool, you won't want to modify the column ordering. And the reason why is that when the parsing tool parses the report, it's going to pull each column of data and treat it as a separate field. So if we reorder the columns, it could impact how things are mapping when it creates the task in Asana. So now we can go ahead and we're going to set a name for our report. We're going to call this task created yesterday. Woo. And then I'm going to click Save and Schedule Report. So this is going to allow me to set up the rule or set up the frequency and the details for the scheduled report. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over to Mail Parser and I want to copy this email address. So I'm going to click Copy to Keyboard, or sorry, Copy to Clipboard. So we want to send this report daily. We're going to say we're going to send it at 3 a.m. And the reason why we're going to send it really early in the morning is so that when I log into Asana, it's going to show me all of my tasks that were created in Bloomerang the prior day. And it's all ready for me when I get started up in the morning. For the recipients, I'm going to add in that Mail Parser email inbox address. And for my subject, I'm going to call this daily report, tasks created yesterday. Okay. And I'm going to click that if there are no results, don't send an email. The reason why you would want to do this is to not only ensure that your task usage in Zapier stays low, but also to avoid errors for the parsing tool or with Zapier if a report ends up being blank. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save and Schedule. Now, if you're doing this at your own organization, you'd need to wait overnight for the first scheduled report to deliver to your Mail Parser inbox before you could set up the automation in Zapier. Now, we already have one of these set up in the interest of time. So we'll pop over into Mail Parser and I will show you how we set up the parsing rules once the first email was received in Mail Parser. So I'm going to go to my one here. So when your first report comes in, it'll allow you to set up rules in Mail Parser. So a rule in Mail Parser really just tells it how you want to treat either the email it received or the attachment to that email. So right now you can see I already have a parsing rule set up, but if we were to add a new one, so let's say this didn't exist, we would click Add Parsing Rule. And we want to add a parsing rule that's tied to the attachment. We don't need to parse the subject, the body of the email, the recipients, or any headers. We need the attachment. Now, when we parse an attachment, the first thing we'll want to do is that we can decide how we want to parse it. And so for this purpose, if we want to treat each record in the report as a separate piece of data, what we want to do is we want to select File Content Table Cells. And you can see that it's going to show that each of my columns then becomes its own separate field. Filter type, we're going to select that it's an Excel file that comes from Bloomerang. And you can see it has all the data formatted. Now, the only other thing we need to do is you can see this first row every time is going to be our row of headers in the report from Bloomerang. So we'll just add a filter to remove and select, and we're going to remove a row. And we're just going to remove the first row. And so then it will always start parsing essentially at row 2, meaning that it's not going to try and send through your headers every time it parses your report and create unnecessary tasks in Asana or create errors in Zapier. So there's 2 pieces to this parsing rule. Again, we're going to parse an attachment. So up here at the top, We're going to choose to do table cells in an Excel format and then skip the first row. And so if everything looks good, we'd say, okay, looks good. And we can call this, Bloomerang Parse Report and just give it a name and it'll save that rule. So you can see here's the one we set up. The one I'd previously set up was set up the same way. Once we set up our parsing rules, what this will allow us to do is this will allow us to then go into Zapier and set up our automation to sync the parsed report to Asana. So if I log into my Zapier here, from my home dashboard, I'm just going to click the Make a Zap button. And I'm going to name my Zap. We're just going to say new task in Bloomerang, create task in Asana. Okay, so when we start with our trigger, the trigger in Zapier is what is the event that kicks off the automation or the workflow. So this is going to start when the scheduled report is parsed by Mail Parser. So that's our trigger. So we're going to choose Mail Parser as our application. And then our trigger event is going to be new email parse. And so this will trigger for each row of that email for each new created task. I'm going to choose my Mail Parser account that's been linked up here. And then I'll select the inbox that I'd want to trigger off of. So we're going to choose the one we just set up here, or the one that I already have set up. So this daily report tasks created yesterday. Again, you would select the one that you had set up with the parsing rules. Now, once I select my parsing inbox, Zapier is going to allow me to test my trigger. So this is why it's important to have had one report delivered to Mail Parser before you try to set up the Zapier automation, because it'll pull in a record from that report that was sent, and you can see all of the fields that come through so that we can go ahead and map those into subsequent steps. So all of the data from that report gets spit out as different columns, or sorry, different fields for each column that we can then map when we create a task in Asana. So before we create the task in Asana, there's one step that we need to do. So on my first action, I'm going to choose a Zapier app. It's called Formatter by Zapier. And I'm going to create a lookup table. So I'm going to go to Utilities and choose a lookup table. Now, a lookup table, I like to think of a lookup table almost like Google Translate, because for this step, we are going to convert the Bloomerang user to the Asana user's email. Now, the reason why this is important is because whereas in Bloomerang, our user comes through in the scheduled report with the name of the user. In Asana, when we create the task, there we go. It requires us to have the email of the Asana user. So we would just create a lookup table for every user we have in Bloomerang that would be assigned tasks, and just create a conversion of what their Bloomerang username would be to convert it to the email. And then our lookup key, I'm just going to map in from my new email parse to Mail Parser from that test record. You can see it gives me all of the data that was parsed out of that report. You can see all of it right here. We're just going to choose the field that carries the Bloomerang username. So if we test this conversion, you're going to see that it's going to spit out Jeff's email address, as opposed to us using his name for creating the task in Asana. So the next thing we'll do is we'll actually create our task in Asana. So I'm going to choose Asana as my app and choose to create a task. I'm going to choose my linked Asana account. Choose our workspace or our organization. Now we could affiliate this with a project if we wanted to, or a section in a project. If we don't add that in there, again, this is some Asana terminology, but we can leave this blank. These are not required fields. And so this would just show up in our inbox as a new task. So we're going to map our data now to the different fields for the task. So the name of the task, we are going to pull in what would have been the subject of the task in Bloomerang. So I'm going to come back to all of my data from my, right here, my new email parsed in mail parser. Scroll down so you can see this a little bit better. I'll zoom in. This might be a little tiny. Okay. So I'm going to go and I'm going to find my subject right here. Call Stormy regarding an opportunity. I'm going to add any notes in here. And there's a couple of things that we kind of consider best practice or would be helpful when creating a task. And so we often like to put in the purpose. And this is just to provide additional information so that when you go to complete this task, you have all of the data that you need. So you can see that I can type in some information here, and then we can map in the corresponding information from our scheduled report. So I'm going to pull in the purpose in the channel. This was my note. I'm going to pull in Stormy's address here. Here's my postal code. Pull in my phone number and my email address. So you can see that it's going to give us a whole lot of data then when we create that task in Asana. So we don't have to go then back into Bloomerang to find all the details on the constituent. It's right there and we can take that action. So for due on, this is going to be my due date of my task. So I'm going to come back into my parsed scheduled report, going to select my due date. In this instance, this test was sent through well before this webinar. So you'll see this due date was in the past. It actually would be in the future, obviously, if this was a live sync. And then the last piece we need to assign is our assignee. So this is who is the Bloomerang user that we want to create the task for in Asana. So instead of choosing from our new email parsed in mail parser, we're going to pull the output from our conversion step, because remember, we don't need the user's name, we need their email address. So we'd pull in the email address and then say that we want to put this in their inbox so that it pops up right when they log into their task management tool the next morning. So once we're done, we could come down here and click continue and turn this on and begin syncing those parsed reports to Asana to create tasks. Now, since this workflow triggers off of a schedule report, we can't provide a live demonstration of the report delivering to mail parser, being parsed, and then triggering the Zapier web workflow. So instead, I'm going to show you how the mapping we just walked through in our demo translates from Bloomerang to Asana. So I have the same task. I adjusted the date and assigned it to myself so that it didn't show up in Jeff's Asana queue. But you can see here how all of the details from that task I had in Asana shows up right here in my task, from my task in Bloomerang, shows up in my task in Asana, so that when I hop into my queue on July 7th, I can go ahead and take action on this upcoming task. I can also add it to projects or engage any of the other functionality that's in Asana. Again, this same premise could be used for another task management tool. So if you use Trello or Jira, maybe you use a calendar tool, there's a lot of different things that you can do, or a lot of different tools that you could create a similar type of record in. So the workflow we demoed is considered a standard sync of Bloomerang tasks to Asana. And this sync can really be expanded and modified to support a lot of different use cases. So if you wanted to take this workflow to the next level, there's a few things you could do. If you have a team member that's familiar with custom API calls, or if you engage an integration consultant, a workflow could be designed to not only create tasks in Asana for new tasks created in Bloomerang, but it could also be customized to update tasks in Bloomerang as complete when the task is completed in Asana. So essentially creating this two-way sync between Bloomerang and your task management solution. We create a full life cycle for the task in both Bloomerang and whatever task management solution you're using, so that you wouldn't have to spend time entering and updating the information across both systems. Now, the workflow could also be enhanced to include a URL to the task or the constituent in Bloomerang. So instead of us putting all the details for the constituent in the note, you could instead have a link that you could click and go to that constituent in Bloomerang. For tasks in Bloomerang that have a channel of in-person or phone, you could also add an action in Asana to create a subtask. That is a prep step that's scheduled for 1 day before the task is set to occur. So if it's an upcoming meeting, you could have a subtask assigned in Asana to prep prior to that meeting. We could create a corresponding interaction in Bloomerang when the task is completed in Asana, or send a reminder for tasks due each day in a team messaging channel like Slack. Now, as I mentioned, there's also alternatives to this workflow. What we showed here was for Asana. You could create an event on a Google or Outlook calendar on the due date for the task in Bloomerang, or you could send a digest of tasks due today to a team communication channel like Slack, like I just said. So there are alternatives to this workflow I just showed for Asana, and we could use that for any different type of task management or calendar solution that you're using. Now, since we've got a couple minutes here, I really want to show a use case for what could be like a supplementary task management automation, but this one lives exclusively within Bloomerang. So what we're going to show here is how to trigger when a new transaction in Bloomerang is received over $1,000. So we're going to say if a major donation comes into Bloomerang, we want to create a follow-up task in Bloomerang 7 days later to reach out and follow up with that constituent. Now, this step that we're going to do for creating a task in Bloomerang, this is a little bit of a more complex action here because we're going to be using the Bloomerang API. Now, I'm going to walk you through step by step how to set this up, but this is a great workflow, whether you use Bloomerang or another task management solution, or this could be paired with the workflow we just demonstrated for syncing tasks to Asana, because this will create that prompt or that follow-up for these major donations. So let's go ahead and dive into this new workflow. So I'm going to go back into Zapier here. Close out of a couple things. Okay, so we're going to click Make a Zap again. And this time we're going to start with Bloomerang. We aren't using scheduled reports or a parsing tool for this workflow. This is a completely self-contained workflow for Bloomerang. So we're going to name our Zap. We're going to say donations of 1,000 plus to create a task in Bloomerang. Okay. So our trigger is going to new transaction in Bloomerang. So we're actually going to use the Bloomerang Zapier app for this one. So our trigger event is going to be a new transaction. I'm going to select my Bloomerang account. Let me go ahead and reconnect it. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to select the types of transactions I'd want to trigger off of. So I'm going to choose donation. I'm going to choose recurring donation payments. And I'm going to choose pledge payments. So I'm going to choose my revenue transactions. So transactions where money would actually come in the door for my organization. I'm going to set my minimum amount to 1,000 because we only want to trigger our workflow if the donation is $1,000 or more. Now, for this workflow, we're not going to include the constituent's cumulative giving history or household information, But if you wanted to, you could set either of these to true if you wanted to map any of this information when you create the task in Bloomerang. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue. And same as we did with our parser, I'm going to click test trigger to pull in a sample transaction that I can use to set up my mapping. There you go. There's my test transaction. Now our first action in this one is also going to be a formatter step with Zapier. But instead of converting data, we are going to calculate, let me actually do this first. We're going to do a date and time as our action event. And we're not going to reformat the date of the transaction. What we're going to do is we're going to calculate what is 7 days from the transaction date, because we want to create this task a week after the transaction came in. So we are going to add subtract time. We'll map in the date of our transaction from Bloomerang. And then for the expression, this is where we can just put plus 7 days. So really straightforward. Zapier provides some instruction here for how you can format how far in advance you'd want to do that, or how you calculate what, or how you identify what the calculation is you'd like to perform. And then we just need to select our to format. So we want to keep our date format as year, month, day, because that is what is accepted by Bloomerang kind of universally. So this is the best date format always for mapping data to or from Bloomerang. So you can see that if this transaction came in on 6/25, and we want to add 7 days, if I test this, it's going to spit out 1 week later, which is right here, which would be July 2nd. So now that I have that date, we can go ahead and set up our action that is the custom API call to create the task in Bloomerang. So there is not an action in the Bloomerang Zapier app right now to create a task, so it requires a custom API call. Again, this is likely going to feel a little bit advanced, but if you follow this recording side by side as you set it up yourself, you will be able to set it up. So let's go ahead and we're going to choose our app, which is going to be Webhooks by Zapier. So this is the name of the app that we're going to use. And our action event is that we're going to post. So what post means in terms of API really just means that we are going to create a record. Now the URL is going to be the API endpoint that we want to use to create a certain type of record. In this instance, we're going to create a task. So this is the API endpoint that we'd want to use. It's api.bloomerang.co/v2/task. Now this piece right here is whether you want a notification sent to the user or not that the task was created and assigned to them. We're going to set this to false. However, if you wanted an email to be sent to the user, the Bloomerang user that the task is assigned to, you can instead set this to true. But we're going to leave this as false. We're going to update our payload type to JSON. So that's just a coding preference, but it's what will work with this call the best. Now, when it comes to data, this is where we get to map in the different information that is needed for this custom call. So we're going to do the due date. Now, the way that I am using capitalization and spacing on this left column, if you're setting this up for yourself, you'll want to set this up identically. So where there's capitalizations and the fact that there's no spaces, you'll want to match this identically. Purpose, user ID, and then account ID. Okay. So this is the data that's needed to create a task in Bloomerang. So now we can map in the corresponding information. So the due date is going to be that calculated date from our formatter step. The subject, I'm actually going to hard code this to just say follow up on major donation. For the note, I'm actually going to map quite a few pieces of information to the note. I'm going to do the date, the amount, fund, and the campaign. And then again, I can just pull this for my new transaction record. So I'm going to search for my campaign name, my fund, pull in my amount, and my date. You can see we have all that right there. For my channel, I'm going to say that I want the user that this is assigned to, they're going to follow up via email. And my purpose is going to be an acknowledgement. Now I'm going to come back to user ID, but the account ID for the new transaction, it's actually called constituent ID. Now the constituent ID is similar to an account number in Bloomerang in the sense that it's completely unique to each constituent, but it's what is used for custom API calls. So you won't see it when you look at the constituent in Bloomerang, other than if we go to a constituent, it is located up here in the URL for that constituent. You can see it right here. But if you're looking at the account itself, you won't see that anywhere, and it's something that can't be edited. So it's a great way to make sure we're getting right to the exact constituent we want to create the task for. Now, when it comes to getting the user ID, this is actually something that we'll grab out of Bloomerang. So I'm going to go to settings and go to view all settings. Let me zoom in here. I'm going to go to edit user accounts, and I'm going to choose the user that I want to assign this task to. So I'm just going to go to Jeff right here. I'm going to click edit. And the user ID is going to be this number up here, similar to how the constituent ID was located in the URL. So is the user ID. So right up here, you can see 10240. And he's my team member that I would want to create a task for to follow up with major donors every time a major donation comes in. So I'm just going to enter his user ID right here. Now, the last piece we need to add in this in order to have this set up is to add what are called our headers down here. And there's two that we add. So the first one is content type, and we just write in application JSON. The other one is our API key. So this is a unique key that is specific to a Bloomerang user, and you can create many of these. But in order to get your API key, you would come up here and go to edit my user. It's actually going to take us to the same page we were on, but you go to edit my user, and you can see right here the different API keys that I've got set up. And so you would click generate, add a name for it, and click generate to create a new one. But in this instance, I already have one set up, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And I just paste my API key in there. Now with API keys, it's really important to not share those outside of your organization or even among other teams in your organization. It's specific to your user. So you may even want to create a Bloomerang user that's called Zapier and have that be kind of like a generic user for your organization that's used for automations, and pull API keys from that user just to ensure that it's future-proofed in case of staff turnover. But it's a really great way to be able to do that. So we've got our API key, and we could then push continue and turn this on and test it. Now, I do actually have a version of this that's already turned on. So I'm going to come into one of my accounts here, and we're going to create a major donation. And I'll show you how that will get set up. So we're going to create a donation. We're going to say that Sherlock gave $2,000. You say that's to our unrestricted fund, our annual campaign. Now, again, this is a sandbox, so a lot of our values are pretty old here, all the way back to 2012. But you can see I'm just going to create a $2,000 donation, and I'm going to click save. Now, it may take a second here. I'm going to go ahead and check on my Zapier on my other screen and see when it goes through. It may take a couple of seconds, but what will happen is that when that donation is created, we'll go ahead and it will calculate that 7 days from the date of the donation and create the task in Bloomerang. So if I refresh here, you'll see that I should have now, yep, right here, my July 6th. This is for the donation that we just had. follow up a major donation. Donation date was today. Here's the donation amount, and here's my fund and my campaign. So you can see how quick and easy that was for a major donation to be able to automate the creation of that task for follow-up. And then if I come into my user here, I can see my tasks, and I can see those tasks that have been created for following up on major donations right here in my queue of tasks that need to be completed. And again, if we had set the send notification to true in our URL, that also would have sent an email notification as well that task was created. So if we had this automation working in tandem with the Bloomerang to Asana workflow from earlier, the new task would hit our daily report tomorrow to create a task in Asana. And tomorrow Jeff would come into work and a new task in Asana would be in there to follow up with this major donor on their recent donation. So to wrap up today's presentation, I want to leave you with a few thoughts on the power of Bloomerang integrations with Zapier. So we believe that Bloomerang should be your central system and that integrations support your Bloomerang database. Data entry, reporting, and automation should start from the lens that Bloomerang is core to your donor management and fundraising technology. Adding Zapier in a task management tool, they serve to supplement and extend the power of Bloomerang. They don't replace it. By syncing tasks created in Bloomerang to a task management solution used across your full organization, you can save time, resources, energy, and ensure that you are not missing deadlines or that tasks aren't getting overlooked. Our goal is that these automations will help you spend less time performing data entry so you have more time to focus on your mission and cultivating donors. So the next step is getting started. So first step is obviously you sign up for a Zapier account. It does provide you with a 14-day free trial, so you can kind of get your feet wet and get used to using Zapier. And then nonprofits do get a discount. You can connect your mail parser and Asana accounts to Zapier, or if you choose to use Outlook or Google Calendar, you can link those up as well. Schedule your report to send to mail parser and set up the standard task sync in Zapier. Then turn on your Zap and monitor it and watch as data syncs from Bloomerang to your task management or calendar solution. Now, again, I do recognize that we covered a lot of information today and some of it may have felt a little advanced. My contact information is here on the screen and my door is truly always open. If you'd like to work with a consultant to set up a workflow or develop a custom Bloomerang integration for a specific use case you have, please don't hesitate to reach out, whether it is with regard to a task management solution or something completely outside of that. We are always happy to answer questions about integration functionality and help you determine if your use case could be automated. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Diana for a quick poll before we open up for any final questions.
Thank you so much, Jessie, and thank you everyone for being with us today. That was a lot of great information as always. I know Jessie mentioned it can feel a little overwhelming, especially if you're not looking at it side by side. I know you want to focus on the presentation, but even I myself love going back to those recordings and setting up those automations. And I especially love that because, I mean, I kind of get lost without my to-do list for the day. And if we can automate any part of that process, so I can focus on other work, that is fantastic. So we still have a couple of minutes left. If you all have any questions, please let us know.
If there's no questions, is there anyone who's still on the call that uses Outlook or Google Calendar? I might have 2 minutes to try and show how we could essentially create an event in one of those tools as opposed to Asana. If there's anyone that is like, I love this workflow, but I don't use Asana, I use Outlook or Google Calendar. I may be able to show Google Calendar. I actually don't have an Outlook account linked up, but I could do a Google Calendar one, and Outlook is fairly similar.
It looks like we have a taker on that offer.
Okay.
Leah says yes, please.
Okay, so let's do that really quick here. So I'm going to go back in Zapier here. I know we've got just a couple of minutes, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. So I'm actually just going to copy my Zap right here, this new task in Bloomerang to create a task in Asana. I'm actually just going to copy it. Now, the harder piece with a Google Calendar or an Outlook workflow is that when you create, I'm going to delete this step. When you create a event in that calendar, when you choose the account, you are actually choosing someone's specific calendar. Now, you could add it to like a shared calendar for your organization, but I'll create a detailed event. But what will happen is it'll require you to choose your calendar. So whereas in the Asana task, we're able to dynamically assign who the task was assigned to, you likely would need to have multiple workflows for the different individuals who could be getting a task. So you could start with a filter here. So Zapier has a filter step where we could say, this one's going to only continue if the user is Jeff Hagwood. Where's Jeff? And so you could use the same trigger for multiple workflows. So it's that new parsed tasks created yesterday report, and have multiple zaps with a filter so that one workflow is for Jeff, one is for me, one's for our team member, Allie. You could go ahead and essentially only filter through the tasks to their calendar for the ones that are assigned to them. And then when we create this detailed event in Google Calendar, again, Outlook operates very similarly. So I'm going to show it in Google Calendar here, but it operates similarly that way. I will choose my calendar that I want this to go to. I'm going to choose my calendar. My summary would be the description. So this would be my subject, which is call Stormy regarding her opportunity. And same as we did with the Asana task, we could pull in, the purpose, channel, address. I think I had a note in there too. Phone, and email. I'm not going to map those fields in right now, but you could see that in the description for the event, you could add all of the same information in there as we did when we were creating the task in Asana. If you have conferencing linked up with your Google Calendar or your Outlook calendar, sometimes it'll let you do that. So for example, you could let's say if it's something, let's say you're only syncing in-person tasks that are set with a channel of in-person where it's going to be a meeting or maybe it's a phone call. You could have this dynamically code it to yes. So it creates that conferencing link and then you can just invite the constituent to it. And then your start date and time. So this would be your date that your task is due. Now you'd want to play around with whether you want to, essentially what time you want to add for that, for the time of that event, because otherwise it would default, I believe it defaults to midnight or like 12:01 a.m. So you likely wouldn't see it when you pop into your calendar. So you may need a formatter step to convert this to not just, the date, but also the date, to make sure it's, let's say it's 8 a.m. You can't just write that in, but there's ways that you can do it with a formatter step to calculate that and make sure that that timestamp is in there as well. So that it doesn't just show up at midnight on your calendar. It actually shows up during a time when you'd see it on there. But that's really, it's very similar to Asana. You can see there's obviously different settings that you could set in terms of if you want to be shown as free or busy. But a lot of great things that you can do, but you can see that a lot of it mirrors in the sense of select your calendar, add your subject to your summary, add all your constituent and task details into the description, and then you're just identifying the date and time that should be listed as in your calendar.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessie. I love how really once you've set up one Zap, you can copy Zaps, you can follow a similar workflow with whichever tool that you use. They're pretty much going to have similar steps. There are going to be some differences where you can customize, but it's pretty much the same steps. I love how the two zaps you showed us today can also work in tandem with each other.
Yes.
So I love that as well.
Yeah, we're big proponents of automating as much as we can at Psychic Solutions. We use automations every day and really want to help nonprofits experience the same kind of automation benefits that we've seen at our own organization. And pairing the two zaps that we demoed today together can be a huge kind of boost in amount of time saved, and not having to touch as much data. Just have it automate behind the scenes for you.
Absolutely. Those time savings are big, wonderful things. Especially a lot of our customers out there we know can be 1 or 2 person shops and use a lot of volunteers to help with some of the tasks. If we can take some of this work away from you so you can focus on other tasks that require more of your attention, then that's wonderful. I don't see any questions right now, but if you all have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be sending out the slides, which includes Jesse's contact information here, so you can always reach out if you have follow-up questions. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today. We at Bloomerang are very excited for the extended capabilities through Zapier. We're very excited to see where all of you will take it, especially since Zapier enables integrations with over 3,000 different apps, and we've only just scratched the surface of what you can do with Bloomerang and Zapier. So we hope that you can find a way to automate your processes and work better with Bloomerang and Zapier. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much, Jesse. That was a lot of wonderful information, and we hope that we see you all again in another Academy class soon. Have a great day. Bye.